Rain fell soft on Morrison Street that March afternoon. The kind of rain Portland knew well. Not heavy enough to drive people inside, but persistent enough to make the world feel gray and forgotten. Margaret Callahan sat beneath
All
the
right, let's
awning of an
move.
abandoned
You got it.
storefront, her back
This
against
way.
brick that had long since stopped holding warmth.
I was
72
so
years had
worried.
carved deep
It's
lines
okay.
into her
I'm here
face, but
now.
her eyes pale blue
I
alert
know.
still
I
held
know.
something the streets hadn't taken.
Look,
Not
it's
yet.
you before the
In her
beard.
weathered
I
hands, she
remember
held
that
a
day.
handkerchief.
Feels like yesterday.
White linen
Time
yellowed with
flies.
age,
Does.
embroidered with delicate forget-me-nots. The stitching was precise professional. In the corner faded, but still visible, MC 1974. She ran her thumb over those initials the way some people touch photographs, a gesture of remembrance, of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The street before her was mostly empty. Wednesday afternoon. Working people at work, kids still in school, just Margaret in the rain and the occasional car splashing through puddles that reflected nothing but gray sky. Then she heard it. Laughter. The wrong kind. The kind that has an edge, a cruelty that makes the air feel different. Margaret looked up. 5 teenagers, boys 16 or 17, moving like a pack. That particular swagger young men get when they're together, when they feel invincible, when they've forgotten that consequences exist. And in front of them, walking fast, head down, clutching a backpack, a little girl. 8 years old maybe, blonde hair in a ponytail, small for her age, wearing a leather jacket that was too big for her, the kind that swallowed her thin shoulders. And on the back, visible even from where Margaret set a logo, a winged skull. Unmistakable. Hell's Angels. The tallest boy, dark hair, athletic build, expensive sneakers, reached out and grabbed the backpack. The little girl stumbled. "Please." The child's voice was small. "Give it back." "Please," the boy mimicked, his voice high and mocking. His friends laughed. "What's a little kid doing with a biker jacket anyway? Your daddy's some kind of tough guy?" He yanked the backpack. The zipper tore. Books spilled onto the wet sidewalk. The girl dropped to her knees trying to gather them. Her hands were shaking. "My dad's gonna—" "Your dad's gonna what?" Another boy kicked a book into the street. It landed in a puddle, pages spreading like wings. "Call the cops. We're scared." They weren't scared. Margaret could see that. These were boys who'd never been scared of anything real. Boys who lived in a world where consequences were things that happened to other people. The tall one, the leader, clearly pushed the girl. Not hard. Just enough to make her stumble backward, land on her hands in the wet. That's when Margaret moved. She didn't think about it, didn't weigh the odds or consider what might happen. She just stood up her joints, protesting her back, complaining, and walked toward them. "Stop!" Her voice wasn't loud, but something in it made them turn. 5 faces, young, unlined, cruel in the thoughtless way of youth. Looking at an old woman in clothes that hadn't been washed in weeks, gray hair, tangled shoes, held together with duct tape. The tall boy smiled. "You talking to us, Grandma?" "Leave her alone," Margaret said. She positioned herself between the boys and the girl. "Just walk away." The boys looked at each other. One of them laughed. "Or what?" The leader stepped closer. Close enough that Margaret could smell cologne, expensive and too strong. "You gonna stop us? You can't even stop yourself from living on the street." Behind Margaret, the little girl was still on the ground, watching with wide eyes. "I'm asking nicely," Margaret said. Her heart was pounding, but her voice stayed steady. "Walk away, please." The boy's smile disappeared. "I don't take orders from homeless trash." He shoved her. Not a push, a shove. Two-handed full force, the kind of thing young strength does without thinking. Margaret went backward. Her feet couldn't find purchase. The world tilted. Then the sidewalk rushed up. The impact was immediate and total. Her head hit concrete. Sound became distant, muffled like she was underwater. Red bloomed across her vision and she realized dimly that it was blood. Her blood, running down from somewhere above her eye. She heard the girl screaming, high and terrified. "You pushed her! You pushed an old lady!" "She got in my way. That's her fault." But their voices were changing now, fear creeping in, the realization maybe that this had gone too far. Margaret tried to sit up. The world spun. Then there were small hands on her arm. The girl, kneeling beside her, tears streaming down her face. Ma'am, are you okay?" Margaret focused on the child's face. Green eyes, freckles across her nose. So young, so scared. "Are you hurt?" Margaret managed to ask. The girl shook her head, crying harder. "You shouldn't have. Why did you?" "Because it was right," Margaret said. The words came automatically from some deep place that remembered being a different person. Someone had to. Behind them, the boys were running, their footsteps echoing, fading gone. The girl pulled out a phone with shaking hands. "I'm calling my dad," she said. "I'm calling my dad right now." Margaret closed her eyes. The rain had stopped, or maybe she just couldn't feel it anymore. She could hear the girl talking, voice high with panic. "Dad, Dad, something happened. There was these boys and a lady helped me and they hurt her, and there's blood and I don't know what to do." Then quieter, calmer. "Please hurry." Margaret lay there on the wet sidewalk, the handkerchief still clutched in her hand, and thought about how strange it was. 41 years. 41 years of being invisible, of being no one, of being nothing. And it took 8 seconds to become visible again. 8 seconds to matter. 8 seconds to remember what it felt like to be human. The Harley's engine was thunder. Deep, visceral, the kind of sound you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. It came from blocks away, growing louder, more urgent, until it dominated everything else. Then it stopped. Margaret, still sitting against the storefront wall with a wadded-up shirt pressed to her forehead, watched a man swing off a black and chrome motorcycle that looked like it had been built by someone who understood machines the way priests understand prayer. He was tall, 6'2" maybe, late 50s gray threading through dark hair that touched his shoulders. Beard trimmed close, showing a jaw that could have been cut from granite. Leather jacket worn soft with aged jeans that had seen 1,000 miles of road. And on his hands, as he pulled off his riding gloves, she saw scars. Old ones, the kind men get from work, from fighting, from living hard. But it was his eyes that made Margaret catch her breath. Dark brown, steady, intense. The kind of eyes that had seen things and remembered them all. The kind that missed nothing. He knelt beside the little girl in one fluid motion. "Ro." His voice was low, controlled, but Margaret heard the fear underneath. The barely contained terror of a parent who's just been told their child was in danger. "You okay, sweetheart? You hurt?" The girl, Ro, shook her head and threw her arms around his neck. I'm okay. But the lady Dad, she saved me and they pushed her and she's bleeding." The man's eyes found Margaret. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Taking measure, reading stories written in scars and lines, and the way a person holds themselves even when they're hurt. Then he stood and walked over. He didn't ask permission before he gently moved the shirt away from her forehead to look at the wound. His hands were steady, careful, hands that knew how to touch without causing pain. "You need stitches," he said. Statement of fact, no room for argument. "I don't have insurance," Margaret said. "I'll be fine." "You won't be fine. Head wounds bleed like hell, and this needs to be closed properly." He stood, offered his hand. "I'm Dallas Thorne. That's my daughter you saved." Margaret looked at his hand, callous, strong, extended without hesitation toward a homeless woman covered in her own blood. She took it. He pulled her up like she weighed nothing. Steadied her when the world tilted again. "Margaret," she said. "Margaret Callahan." "Well, Margaret Callahan." He kept his hand on her elbow, supporting her without making it obvious. "You did something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. And now you're going to let me take you to the hospital and pay for it because I owe you my daughter's safety. Non-negotiable." It wasn't a question. Margaret wanted to argue, wanted to say she didn't need charity, didn't deserve kindness, couldn't accept help from strangers. But Ro was looking at her with those green eyes, still crying, still shaking and saying, "Please, ma'am, please let my dad help." And Margaret was so tired of being alone. "Okay," she whispered. Dallas nodded once. "Ro, get on the bike. You too, Miss Callahan." "I've never. First time for everything." His eyes found hers again, and something in them was gentle, despite the hardness of his face. "I won't let you fall." St. Vincent Hospital, emergency room. The nurse who stitched Margaret's forehead was efficient and kind, 6 sutures precise and quick. Local anesthetic that made everything feel distant and unreal. Dallas sat in the corner, filling out paperwork, answering questions, providing insurance information when Margaret tried to say she didn't need it. "I'm paying," he'd said, and that was the end of it. Rose sat next to him, holding his hand, watching Margaret with something like awe. When the nurse finished and left them alone, Rose spoke. "Why did you help me?" Margaret looked at this child, small and brave and still wearing that oversized leather jacket. "Because someone had to," Margaret said. "And because—" She stopped, started again. "You reminded me of someone. Someone I should have been braver for." Ro didn't understand. How could she? She was 8. but she came over and very carefully hugged Margaret around the middle, being gentle, like she knew Margaret might break. "Thank you," Ro whispered. "Thank you for being brave." Something in Margaret's chest cracked. Some wall she'd built 41 years ago. And behind it was pain, yes, but also something she'd forgotten existed. Warmth. Dallas stood. "You got somewhere to go." Margaret started to lie. Started to say yes, of course, somewhere safe and dry. But Ro was looking at her, and this man had kind eyes despite his hard face, and she was just so tired of lying. "No." Dallas nodded like he'd expected that. "The garage I own has a room in back. Used to be an office. It's got a bathroom, a cot, a space heater. Nothing fancy, but it's dry and it locks. You'd be doing me a favor, actually." "A favor?" "Security. Been some break-ins in the neighborhood lately. Having someone there at night would be good. I'd pay you. Minimum wage under the table if you prefer. Just need someone to keep an eye on things after I close up." It was a lie. Margaret knew it was a lie. This was charity dressed up as employment. But it was such a kind lie, and Ro was still holding her hand, and Margaret had nowhere else to go. "Just temporary," she heard herself say, "until I figure something else out." "Sure," Dallas said. "Temporary." But the way he said it, Margaret got the feeling he didn't believe in temporary any more than she did. The garage sat on a corner lot, red brick and large windows. The kind of building that had been something else before it was this. Auto shop, maybe. Light industrial. Now it was a cathedral to chrome and steel. Inside, 4 motorcycles in various stages of repair or customization. Tools organized with military precision on pegboards. The smell of oil and metal and leather. And in the back, through a door marked private, a small room. Cot with clean sheets. Space heater that actually worked. Bathroom with hot water. Window that looked out on a parking lot but had a lock that was solid. To Margaret, who'd spent the last 6 months sleeping under bridges and in doorways, it looked like the Ritz. "Towels in the bathroom," Dallas said, setting down a bag he'd stopped to pick up. "Toothbrush, soap, shampoo. Some clothes that might fit belong to my wife. She passed 3 years back, but I kept some things. Figure she'd want them used." He said it matter of fact, but Margaret heard the grief underneath. Old grief settled in like furniture, but still there. "I'm sorry," she said. "Yeah, me too." He looked around the room, hands in his pockets. "Kitchen's not much. Coffee maker, microwave, mini fridge. Help yourself to whatever. I'll be here most days from 8 to 6. Weekends too, usually. You need anything, just ask." "I will, thank you." He nodded and turned to go. Stopped at the door. "What those boys did, what you did, that took guts. Real guts. Not many people would have done that." "I didn't think about it," Margaret said honestly. "I just reacted. Reacting like that." Dallas looked at her. "That's not nothing. That's who you are underneath everything else. Remember that." Then he was gone, and Margaret was alone in a room that was hers, at least for now. She sat on the cot and cried. Not from pain, not from fear, from relief. For the first time in 41 years, she had a door she could lock, a place that was safe, a tomorrow that didn't terrify her. It wasn't much, but it was everything. 2 weeks passed like a dream. Margaret fell into routine the way drowning people grab lifelines, desperately, completely. She woke at 6, made coffee in the small pot Dallas kept stocked, cleaned the bathroom until it gleamed, swept the garage floor, organized tools that were already organized just to have something to do. Dallas would arrive at 8 always, with 2 breakfast sandwiches and 2 large coffees. He'd hand her one of each without comment, without ceremony. Just set it down and get to work. At first they didn't talk much. Margaret would sit in the corner watching him work, watching his hands move with absolute confidence over engines and frames and brake lines, watching him solve mechanical problems the way some people solve puzzles with focused patience, competence. Ro would arrive after school, backpack slung over one shoulder, that same oversized leather jacket making her look even smaller. She'd do homework at the front desk, stopping occasionally to ask Dallas questions or to bring Margaret tea she'd made in the small kitchen. "Chamomile," Ro said, the first time handing Margaret a chipped mug with serious ceremony. "It's calming. That's what my mom used to say." Margaret took it with hands that shook slightly. "Thank you, honey." Ro smiled, small and sweet. Then she pulled out embroidery thread and a piece of cloth. "Can you teach me?" She held up the handkerchief Margaret kept in her pocket. "How to make flowers like that?" And Margaret, who hadn't embroidered in 4 decades, found that her hands still remembered. They sat together in the late afternoon light, Margaret guiding small fingers through basic stitches. Chain stitch, back stitch, French knots, the same stitches her own mother had taught her 65 years ago. Dallas would glance over occasionally, never interrupting. But Margaret could feel him watching, seeing something that made the hard lines of his face soften just slightly. After a week, the silence between them changed, became comfortable instead of uncertain. And Dallas started talking. Rose's mother, Sienna, she was a nurse, he said one afternoon, hands deep in a carburetor. Met her at a veterans clinic. I just left. The Angels was trying to figure out who I was without the patch. She saw right through all my bullshit, made me be better. Margaret, sorting washers by size, listened. Cancer took her fast, 6 months from diagnosis to gone. His jaw tightened. Ro was 5, too young to lose her mom. But Sienna, she made sure Ro knew she was loved, made sure I knew how to be the kind of father our girl needed. You're doing good, Margaret said quietly. She's a wonderful child. She is. Dallas looked at Ro doing homework with fierce concentration. She's everything good about me and Sienna combined. Smart, kind, brave as hell. He paused. Like someone else I know. Margaret felt heat in her cheeks. I'm not brave. You stood between my daughter and 5 teenagers who could have really hurt you. That's not brave. That was just doing what was right. Exactly. Dallas met her eyes. Brave isn't not being scared. It's doing what's right anyway. Margaret didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But something inside her, something that had been frozen for a very long time, began to thaw. Margaret was organizing the supply closet when she noticed the photograph. It had fallen behind a box of shop rags, black and white edges worn soft with age. She picked it up carefully. A woman, young, beautiful, laughing, standing next to a motorcycle, and behind her arm around her waist a man. Tall, powerful build, leather jacket covered in patches. On the back in faded ink, me and Declan. First rally, May 1974. Margaret's hands started shaking. She knew that jacket, knew that patch. Hell's Angels, Portland chapter. She knew because she'd seen it before. Worn it even back when it was acceptable for old ladies to wear their man's colors to runs and rallies. She knew because that woman in the photograph, young laughing hole, was her, and the man was Declan. Declan Callahan, her husband. Dead 44 years. The photograph slipped from her fingers. That yours? Margaret spun. Dallas stood in the doorway, coffee cup in hand, watching her with those steady eyes. I found it, behind the box. I didn't mean to. It's okay. He came closer, picked up the photograph, looked at it for a long moment. This is you, isn't it? No point in lying, not now. Yes. And him, Dallas turned the photograph so she could see. That's Declan Callahan. It wasn't a question. Margaret nodded, unable to speak. Dallas set down his coffee. I made some calls after the first day. Wanted to make sure you were safe, that nobody was looking for you, that kind of thing. Asked around with some old contacts. He paused. Rusty McKenna called me back. Told me about Declan, about you. What did he tell you? Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. That Declan Callahan was one of the founding members of Portland chapter. That he was a legend. That he died in 1982, saving a kid who'd wandered onto I-84. And that his wife, Margaret, disappeared after. Just vanished. Nobody could find you. Margaret closed her eyes. I tried to disappear, she said. Tried to stop existing. Why? Such a simple question. Such an impossible answer. Margaret sank onto a stool. I had a daughter, Ainsley. She was 12 when Declan died. The words came slowly, painfully, like extracting splinters. I couldn't handle it. The grief, the loss. I started drinking. Stopped being able to take care of her. Social services took her in 1985. Said I was unfit. Dallas said nothing, just listened. They were right. Margaret continued. I was unfit. I was broken. So I let them take her. Let them give her to a family who could actually be parents. And then I just drifted. Couldn't face what I'd lost. Couldn't face who I'd become. So I disappeared. 41 years, Dallas said quietly. 41 years. Silence filled the garage. Not uncomfortable, just heavy with truth. Declan would have understood, Dallas finally said. Grief does things to people, makes them into someone they don't recognize. That doesn't make you a bad person, just makes you human. I abandoned my daughter. You survived. That's what you did. You survived something that would have killed a lot of people. Dallas picked up the photograph again. And yesterday you saved my daughter. You put yourself between her and harm without hesitating. That tells me who you really are. Not what happened 40 years ago. Who you are now. Margaret looked at him, this hard man with kind eyes, this stranger who'd become something like a friend. Why are you helping me? She asked. Really? Dallas considered the question. I was in the Angels for 23 years, joined when I was 19. It taught me a lot of things, but the most important was this: you take care of your own. Always, no matter what. He handed her back the photograph. You're Declan Callahan's widow. That makes you family, and I take care of family. I'm not really. Yeah, you are. His tone left no room for argument. Rusty's coming by tomorrow. Wants to see you. He was Declan's best friend. Looked for you for years. Margaret felt panic rise in her throat. I don't want. Hey, Dallas's voice was gentle. It's okay to be scared, but you don't have to run anymore. Not from me, not from Rusty, not from the people who want to help you. I don't deserve help. That's not your call to make. He moved toward the door, paused. Declan saved a kid in 1982, gave his life for a stranger's child. You saved my kid 2 weeks ago. You're more like him than you think. Then he was gone, leaving Margaret alone with a photograph of a woman she used to be and a man she still missed, with an ache that felt like hunger. She looked at the image for a long time. Then carefully she tucked it into her pocket next to the embroidered handkerchief. Some things you keep, some memories you hold on to, even if they hurt, especially if they hurt, because pain means it mattered. Pain means it was real. The Harley that pulled up to the garage was older than Dallas's, a 1970s shovelhead, immaculate chrome, gleaming in weak sunlight. And the man who climbed off it moved like someone who'd been riding since before motorcycles had electric starters. 70 years old if he was a day. Lean, weathered gray hair and a long braid down his back. Face like carved wood, all hard lines and sharp angles. But when he pulled off his sunglasses, his eyes were bright blue and impossibly alive. He wore colors, full patch, Hell's Angels Portland chapter. And when those blue eyes found Margaret through the garage window, they went wide with something that looked like disbelief, or hope, or maybe both. Dallas met him at the door. Rusty. Dallas. They gripped forearms, that particular handshake men who've shared something use. Then Rusty looked past him. Is that really her? Yeah. Jesus Christ. Rusty took off his riding gloves slowly. 41 years. We looked everywhere. I know. She okay? Getting there. Rusty nodded once. Then he walked into the garage and Margaret stood from where she'd been sitting, and they looked at each other across 41 years of absence. Maggie, Rusty said. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it for emotion in a long time, and it was Rusty. Maggie Callahan. Rusty. She remembered him. Younger, of course. Dark hair instead of gray. But the same eyes, the same way of standing, like he was ready for anything. You look old, he laughed. Actual laughter, surprised and genuine. You look like you've been through hell. I have. Yeah, I believe it. He came closer, stopped a few feet away, respecting her space. Declan was my brother. You know that. Not blood, but the kind that matters. When he died, I looked for you. We all did. Wanted to make sure you and Ainsley were okay. Margaret's throat tightened. Ainsley. We know. Social services. 1985. We tried to get custody, but they said we weren't suitable. Bitterness crept into his voice. Bikers, you know, not fit to raise kids according to the state. Where is she? The question burst out before Margaret could stop it. Do you know where she is? Rusty shook his head. Adoption records are sealed. We tried to find her, but... He spread his hands. I'm sorry. Margaret nodded, not trusting herself to speak. But you're here, Rusty continued. You're alive. That's what matters. And what Dallas told me what you did for his girl Declan would have been proud. I'm not proud of anything, Margaret said quietly. I ran away. I gave up. I've been nothing for 41 years. You survived, Rusty said, and it sounded like Dallas. Maybe it was something they all believed. You kept breathing when a lot of people would have quit. That's not nothing. He reached into his jacket, pulled out something wrapped in cloth. Unfolded it carefully. A patch. Hell's Angels Portland chapter. Women's auxiliary. Old school, the kind they didn't make anymore. This was yours, he said. Declan kept it. After he died, I kept it. Been carrying it for 41 years, hoping I'd find you someday. He held it out. It's still yours, if you want it. Margaret stared at the patch. At the winged skull, the Portland rocker, the old lady tag that marked her as belonging to someone. As belonging. Her hands shook as she reached for it. The fabric was soft worn. It smelled like leather and time and memories she tried to bury. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "Probably not," Rusty agreed. "But Declan would want you to have it. So take it anyway." Margaret clutched the patch to her chest, felt something inside her crack wider, felt tears she'd been holding back for 4 decades finally break free. Rusty pulled her into a hug, gentle but strong, the kind of hug that said, "I've got you and you're not alone, and it's okay to fall apart because someone will catch you." She cried into his leather jacket, while this old man she barely remembered held her like family. Because that's what they were, what they'd always been, even when she'd forgotten. Roe was teaching Margaret a new stitch when the first rock hit the window. Not hard enough to break, but hard enough to make them both jump. Dallas was up from under the Harley he'd been working on in an instant, crossing to the window looking out at the street. "Stay here," he said. His voice had changed, gone flat and hard and dangerous. He stepped outside. Margaret stood heart-pounding. Through the window she could see them. 5 boys, the same 5 from 2 weeks ago. The tall one, the leader, stood in front, and next to him an older man, 50 maybe, expensive suit, graying hair, the kind of face that smiled for cameras but went cold when the cameras were off. Dallas stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed. Still, calm, but Margaret could see the tension in his shoulders. Words were exchanged, too quiet to hear through the glass. But the body language told the story. The man in the suit pointing at the garage, gesturing, face red with anger, the boy smirking, confident, safe behind his father, and Dallas utterly motionless except for when he spoke. Each word deliberate, each word a warning. Then the man pulled out a phone, made a call, spoke briefly, put the phone away and smiled, said something else to Dallas. And Dallas's jaw tightened. The man and the boys got into an expensive SUV and drove away. Dallas stood there for a moment, then came back inside. His face was carved from stone. "What happened?" Margaret asked. Dallas looked at her, at Roe, back at her. "That was Councilman Pierce Voss and his son Garrett. Garrett's the one who pushed you. Pierce says I'm running an illegal business. Says I'm harboring homeless people in violation of residential codes. Says he's going to have the city shut me down unless I comply with regulations within 30 days. Margaret felt ice in her stomach. "Because of me. Because he's a bully who doesn't like being told his kid can't do whatever he wants. I should leave." "You're not leaving." Dallas's voice was firm. "This is your home now, and nobody is going to take that away. But your business? We'll be fine." He pulled out his phone, started typing. "Rusty knows people. I know people. We'll handle this." "How?" Dallas looked up, and for the first time since she'd met him, Margaret saw something cold in his eyes. Something that reminded her he'd spent 23 years in one of the most feared motorcycle clubs in America. "The way we always handle bullies," he said quietly. "We show them what happens when you come after family." He sent the message, and somewhere in Portland, phones started ringing. 72 hours until the Hells Angels respond. The morning after Pierce Voss's threat arrived cold and sharp. Margaret woke at 5:30, made coffee with hands that wouldn't quite stay steady, and sat watching the sun struggle up behind Portland's skyline. Somewhere out there, a councilman with power and money was moving pieces on a board, and she was one of those pieces. Small, expendable, easy to remove. The thought made her want to run. 41 years of survival instinct screaming at her to pack the few things she had and disappear before she destroyed the good things she'd found here. Before she cost Dallas everything he'd built. She was reaching for her bag when the door opened. Dallas stood there, 2 breakfast sandwiches and 2 coffees balanced in his hands like always. "You planning on leaving?" he asked. Not angry, just matter of fact. Margaret's hand dropped. "I don't want to cause you trouble." "Too late. Trouble's already here." He set the food down. "Question is whether you're going to face it with us or run from it." "I've been running for 41 years. I'm good at it." "I bet you are." Dallas sat across from her. "But here's the thing about running, you never get anywhere. Just away. And away is lonely." Margaret looked at her coffee. "What if they shut you down? What if you lose everything because of me?" "Then we'll deal with it. Together." He took a bite of his sandwich, chewed thoughtfully. "Rusty's making calls. Some of the old Portland chapter guys who've been around since Declan's time. They want to help." "Why would they help me? I disappeared. I abandoned everything." "Because you're Declan Callahan's widow. Because you saved my daughter. Because it's the right thing to do. Dallas leaned forward. And because Pierce Voss just made a mistake. What mistake? He threatened family. And the one thing the angels never tolerate is threats against family. Before Margaret could respond, the sound of motorcycles filled the air. Not one or two, many. Dallas smiled. Not warm, not friendly. The smile of a man who knows backup has arrived. That'll be them now. The motorcycles lined up outside the garage with military precision. 12 bikes, all Harleys, all immaculate. Riders ranging from their early 60s to mid-70s, every one of them wearing full colors. Margaret watched through the window as they dismounted, moved with purpose, with coordination. Like soldiers who drilled together so long they didn't need to communicate. Rusty led them inside. Behind him came others. Men whose names Margaret had forgotten or never knew. Faces weathered by decades of sun and wind and choices. Hands scarred from work and fighting and living hard. They filled Dallas's garage like it had been built for this moment. Rusty made introductions. You know, Dallas, this here is Boone Guthrie. Used to be highway patrol before he saw the light. Boone was 64, built like a fire hydrant with a face that had forgotten how to smile somewhere around 1985. He nodded to Margaret. Ma'am, Fletcher Mercer. We call him Smoke. Man can find out anything about anyone. Fletcher was tall, thin as a rail, 67, with eyes that never stopped moving. Assessing, recording. He'd been a journalist, Margaret remembered suddenly. Investigative, before newspapers died and he didn't. Cormac Brennan, judge, because he used to be one. Cormac was 65, gray suit under his leather spectacles perched on his nose. Lawyer's eyes, sharp, missing nothing. And you already met Rusty? Dallas finished. Rusty pulled out a chair. Sit, Maggie. You're part of this whether you like it or not. Margaret sat. 12 men arranged themselves around Dallas's garage like they were planning a military operation, which she supposed they were. Here's what we know, Fletcher began. He had a tablet which looked strange in his weathered hands. Pierce Voss, 52, councilman for 8 years. Up for re-election next year, rumored to have mayoral ambitions. Married one son, Garrett, 17. Lives in the West Hills, drives a Mercedes, belongs to 3 country clubs. Sounds like a real pillar of the community, someone muttered. He is, publicly. Fletcher swiped his screen. But I did some digging. Man's got connections to some interesting real estate developers. And get this, there's a development project proposed for this area. Mixed-use high-end condos retail. $60 million project. Dallas leaned forward. Let me guess. This garage is in the way. Not just in the way, right in the middle. Prime corner lot. Without it, the project doesn't work geometrically. Can't make the parcel sizes work for financing. Cormac tapped his pen on the table. So this isn't about his son getting embarrassed. This is about money. This is always about money, Rusty said. Power and money, the two things men like Pierce understand. What about the harassment? Dallas asked. The attack on Maggie. Can we use that? Boone shook his head. No witnesses except her and the girl. And Pierce will say his son's version is true, that the old lady was threatening them. Word of a councilman's kid versus a homeless woman won't go anywhere in court. Margaret felt the old shame rising. The knowledge that she didn't matter, wasn't credible, was nothing. Then we change the equation, Rusty said. He looked at Cormac. What can we do legally? I can file an injunction, claim harassment, abuse of power. But it'll take time. And Pierce has lawyers, good ones. They'll tie it up in motions and continuances for months. We don't have months, Dallas said. He gave us 30 days. Then we need to apply pressure, Fletcher said. Find something Pierce doesn't want found. Every politician has skeletons. We just need to open the right closet. How long will that take? Fletcher smiled, thin, sharp. Give me 72 hours. What do we do in the meantime? One of the younger bikers asked. Rusty stood, looked at each of them in turn. We remind Pierce Voss who he's dealing with. We show up, legally, respectfully, but everywhere. Every city council meeting, every public event. 40 or 50 of us wearing colors, sitting quiet and polite in the back. We show him that Dallas isn't alone, that Maggie isn't alone, that when you come after one of us, you come after all of us. That's not illegal, Margaret asked quietly. Not even close, Cormac said. Public meetings are public. We have every right to attend. Won't that make Pierce angrier? Probably, Rusty agreed. But angry people make mistakes, and we need him to make mistakes. Dallas looked at Margaret. You okay with this? It's gonna get visible. People will ask questions about who you are and why we're protecting you. Margaret thought about running, about disappearing again. Then she looked at Rose sitting in the corner doing homework, glancing over every few minutes to make sure Margaret was still there. "I'm okay with it," she said. "Good." Rusty pulled out his phone. "Then let's make some calls. Time to let the old guard know we're back in business. The 48 hours. The first city council meeting with the bikers in attendance made the local news. 53 members of the Hells Angels Portland chapter, ranging in age from 58 to 74, had filed quietly into the council chambers and taken seats in the public gallery. They'd worn their colors. They'd sat with arms crossed. They'd said nothing. But their presence had been deafening. Pierce Voss had stumbled over his words 3 times during his presentation on neighborhood improvement initiatives. His face had gone red, his hands had shaken slightly. The mayor had called for a brief recess and asked Rusty, as the obvious leader, if there was a problem. "No problem," Rusty had said politely. "Just exercising our civic duty, paying attention to local government. Isn't that what you want from citizens?" The mayor had no response to that. The meeting had continued. The bikers had stayed until the end. Then they'd filed out, started their motorcycles in perfect synchronization, and ridden away. The message was clear. We're watching. The next day, Pierce called the police. "There's a gang threatening me," he'd said, "intimidating a public official." The police had come to Dallas's garage, had asked questions, had looked around. Boone, who still had friends in the department, had been there, had explained in his calm former cop voice that attending public meetings wasn't illegal, that sitting quietly wasn't threatening, that maybe if Councilman Voss was feeling intimidated by senior citizens exercising their First Amendment rights, he should examine why that was. The cops had left without filing a report. Strike one against Pierce. That same afternoon, Fletcher had called a meeting. "Found something," he said. He looked excited in the way people who hunt information get excited. "Pierce's brother-in-law owns a construction company, Brennan Brothers Development. And guess who's been awarded 3 major city contracts in the last 4 years? The brother-in-law," Dallas said. "Bingo. All sole source contracts. All awarded without competitive bidding. All approved by city council votes where Pierce abstained from voting but was present for the discussion." Cormac leaned back. "That's not illegal. Abstaining from votes where you have a conflict of interest is actually proper procedure." "True, but here's where it gets interesting. The contracts were all for projects in districts represented by other council members, and I found campaign donation records. Brennan Brothers Development has donated to every single council member except Pierce, $20,000 each over the past 3 years. That's a quid pro quo," Cormac said slowly. "They're buying votes for projects that benefit Pierce's family while keeping Pierce's hands technically clean. Can we prove it? Maybe. I'd need to subpoena records, examine the bidding process, talk to competing contractors who didn't get the work." "How long?" "Weeks, maybe months." Rusty shook his head. "We don't have that kind of time." "Then we use what we have," Fletcher said. "I've got a friend at the Oregonian, still does investigative work. Give her this information, let her start asking questions. Even if nothing sticks legally, the press coverage will hurt Pierce." "Do it," Dallas said. Fletcher made the call. Strike 2. Margaret was sweeping the garage when Garrett Voss and 3 of his friends showed up. It was late afternoon. Dallas was out picking up parts. Roe was at a friend's house. Margaret was alone. The boys didn't come inside, just stood on the sidewalk, staring. Margaret's hands tightened on the broom handle. Garrett smiled, the same cruel smile from 2 weeks ago. "My dad's gonna destroy this place, you know. Gonna take it all away, and then you'll be back on the street where you belong." Margaret said nothing. "You should have stayed invisible," one of the other boys said. "Nobody cares about homeless trash." "My dad's important," Garrett continued. "He's got power. What do you got? Nothing. You're nothing." Something inside Margaret shifted. She'd heard these words before, in her own head, for 41 years. "You're nothing. You don't matter. You're invisible." But looking at these boys, these children who'd never known hardship, never faced real consequences, never had to fight for anything, she realized something. They were wrong. She wasn't nothing. She was Margaret Callahan, Declan Callahan's widow, mother to Ainsley, survivor of 41 years on the street, protector of children, member of a family that spanned decades. She was somebody. Margaret set down the broom, walked to the doorway, looked Garrett dead in the eyes. "Your father is a bully, and so are you. But here's what you don't understand. Bullies only win when good people do nothing, and I'm done doing nothing." Garrett's smile faltered. "You think you're tough," he said, but his voice had lost its confidence. You think those old bikers scare me? They should, Margaret said quietly, because they protect their own. And I'm one of their own now. You touch me, you touch them. You threaten this garage, you threaten them. And they don't forget. They don't forgive. They just wait. She stepped back inside, closed the door. Through the window, she watched the boys shift uncomfortably, watched Garrett's bravado crack, watched them leave. Her hands were shaking. But not from fear, from power. For the first time in 41 years, she'd stood her ground. The second attack came at night. Margaret was sleeping when she heard the glass break. Not the garage window, somewhere else, the small bathroom window in her room. She was on her feet instantly, heart hammering. Then she heard voices, young, angry, just outside. Get the old bitch, make her pay. More breaking glass. Something heavy hit the door. Margaret grabbed her phone, the cheap prepaid Dallas had given her, and called him. He answered on the first ring. Someone's here, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Breaking things. I think it's Garrett and his friends. Lock the door. Don't open it. I'm 2 minutes away. The line stayed open. She could hear wind, the roar of a motorcycle engine. Dallas's breathing controlled, and even despite the speed he must be traveling. Something slammed against her door. Once. Twice. Come out, you old hag, Garrett's voice slurred. Drunk or high or both. You think you can threaten me? You think you matter? Another impact. The door shuddered but held. Then she heard it. Multiple motorcycles, coming fast. The deep thunder of Harley engines pushed hard. The voices outside changed. Fear replacing bravado. Oh shit! Run! Footsteps scattering. Then Dallas was there, phone still pressed to his ear. Maggie, talk to me. I'm okay. They ran when they heard you coming. Stay there. Don't come out yet. She heard him moving. Heard other voices, Rusty Boone others. After 5 minutes, a knock on her door. It's me. Safe to open. Margaret unlocked the door. Dallas stood there with Rusty and 4 other bikers. Their faces were hard, dangerous. These weren't retirees playing at being tough. These were men who'd lived hard lives and knew how to handle violence when it came. They're gone, Dallas said. But they did some damage, broke 3 windows, spray painted some words on the garage door, slashed 2 motorcycle tires. I'm sorry. Don't. This isn't your fault. Dallas looked at Rusty. We need to escalate. Rusty nodded slowly. Yeah, we do. What does that mean? Margaret asked. It means we stop playing nice, Boone said. His cop's eyes were flat, cold. These kids attacked you twice now. Could have seriously hurt you. They need to understand there are consequences. We're not going to hurt children, Margaret said quickly. No, Rusty agreed. But we're going to scare the hell out of them. The next morning when Garrett Voss left his house to go to school, there were 3 motorcycles parked on the street. 3 older men in leather, sitting on their bikes. Not moving. Not threatening. Just there. Watching. Garrett saw them. Froze. One of the men, Fletcher, nodded politely. Smiled. Said nothing. Garrett went back inside. The bikers stayed. When Pierce Voss came out 20 minutes later screaming about harassment and intimidation, the bikers calmly explained that they were on a public street. They had every right to be there. They weren't blocking anything, weren't threatening anyone. Just sitting. Pierce called the police. The police came, looked at the situation, told Pierce the same thing they told him before people are allowed to exist in public spaces. The bikers stayed until Garrett finally came out, got in his car and drove to school. Then they followed him, at a legal distance, obeying all traffic laws. And when Garrett got to school, there were 5 more motorcycles in the parking lot. Different bikers, all sitting quietly, all watching. That afternoon when school let out, the bikers were still there, and they followed Garrett home. This pattern continued for 3 days. Everywhere Garrett went, there were bikers. Not threatening, not approaching, just present, visible, watching. On the 3rd day, Garrett called his father in tears. Make them stop. They're everywhere. I can't do this. Pierce tried to get restraining orders. But restraining orders require proof of threat or harassment, and the bikers were doing nothing illegal. They were just exercising their freedom of movement, just like Pierce had exercised his power to threaten Dallas's business. The difference was the bikers were better at it. Fletcher's journalist friend published her article. The headline read, City Councilman's Family Business Wins Lucrative Contracts Questions Raised About Bidding Process. It was careful, factual, raised questions without making direct accusations. But the damage was done. The article detailed the contracts, the donations, the abstention votes, the family connections. It included quotes from competing contractors who said they'd never even been given the chance to bid, from city employees who spoke anonymously about pressure to award contracts to specific companies. By afternoon, it had been picked up by 2 TV stations. By evening, the State Ethics Board had announced a preliminary inquiry. Pierce held a press conference, claimed he'd done nothing wrong, said the timing was suspicious, suggested it was a coordinated attack by criminal elements, meaning the bikers, which was a mistake, because Rusty held his own press conference an hour later. Standing in front of Dallas's garage with Margaret beside him and 50 bikers behind him, he spoke directly to the cameras. "My name is Russell McKenna. I'm a 70-year-old retired Navy SEAL and member of the Hells Angels Portland chapter. Councilman Voss called us criminals. Let me tell you who we really are." He introduced the men behind him, one by one. "This is Boone Guthrie, retired Highway Patrol, 26 years of service. This is Cormac Brennan, retired judge, 30 years on the bench. This is Fletcher Mercer, Pulitzer Prize finalist for investigative journalism. This is Dallas Thorne, veteran of Desert Storm, Purple Heart recipient, small business owner and single father." On and on, each man's service record, each man's contribution to society. Then Rusty stepped forward again. "We're not criminals, we're citizens, we're veterans, we're fathers and grandfathers. And we're here because a man with power decided to use that power to hurt someone who couldn't fight back. This woman," he gestured to Margaret, "is Margaret Callahan, 72 years old, widow of Declan Callahan, who died in 1982, saving a child's life on I-84. She's been homeless for 41 years. 2 weeks ago, she put herself between a child and 5 teenagers who were hurting that child. She was attacked for her bravery. And then she was attacked again by Councilman Voss's son. We're here because nobody else would protect her. We're here because it's the right thing to do. And we're here because when you come after one of ours, you come after all of us." He paused. "Let that sink in. Councilman Voss can call us whatever he wants, but we know who we are, and we know who he is. The ethics investigation will prove which one of us is really the criminal." The press conference went viral. Within hours, #StandWithMaggie was trending locally. People started showing up at the garage, bringing food, offering support, sharing their own stories of homelessness, of fighting power, of being helped by unexpected people. Pierce Voss's approval ratings dropped 12 points overnight. Dallas found Margaret sitting outside watching the sunset behind the city. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "This is all so much, so fast. 2 weeks ago, I was nobody. Now I'm on the news." "You were never nobody," Dallas said. "You just didn't have anyone to remind you." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then Rusty's people found something about Ainsley. Dallas sat up straighter. "Your daughter." He didn't want to tell me until he was sure. "But there's an Ainsley Brennan, same age, adopted in 1985 from Portland, working as a nurse at Providence Hospital. Just across town." Dallas waited. "Let her process. I don't know if I can face her," Margaret whispered. "What do I say? Sorry I abandoned you. Sorry I was weak. Sorry I let them take you. You say the truth. You say you loved her. You say you were broken. You say you're sorry." Dallas's voice was gentle. "And then you let her decide if she wants you in her life. What if she hates me? Maybe she does. Maybe she doesn't. But you'll never know if you don't try." Margaret thought about that, about the possibility of seeing her daughter after 41 years, about the terror and hope and desperate longing that thought brought. Before she could respond, her phone rang. "Unknown number." She answered. "Is this Margaret Callahan?" A woman's voice. Professional. Cool. "Yes. This is Linda Morrison with Child Protective Services. I'm calling about Rowan Thorne." Margaret's blood went cold. "What about her?" "We've received a complaint that she's living in an unsafe environment, that her father is associating with known gang members, and that there's a potentially dangerous homeless individual living on the premises. We need to conduct a home visit within 48 hours. "Who filed the complaint?" "I'm not at liberty to say." But Margaret knew. Pierce Voss had just escalated to the nuclear option. He was coming after Roe. She hung up, looked at Dallas. "What's wrong?" he asked. She told him. She watched his face go through shock, then anger, then something colder and more dangerous than either. "He's using the system against us," Dallas said quietly, "trying to take my daughter because he can't beat us any other way. What do we do?" Dallas stood, pulled out his phone, made a call. "Rusty, Pierce just declared war. Yeah, CPS complaint. He's coming after Roe. A pause. No, we handle this smart. We handle this right, but we end it. Tonight, he hung up. Looked at Margaret. Get ready. This is about to get very loud. Within an hour, the garage was filled with bikers again. But this time, the mood was different. No more patience. No more playing by rules that only applied to them. Fletcher spoke first. I've been digging deeper. Found something big. Pierce isn't just taking kickbacks on city contracts. He's been using his position to acquire properties through the city's eminent domain process, then flipping them to developers. For profit. That's not just ethics violations. That's criminal fraud. Can you prove it? Cormac asked. I've got documents, emails, transfer records. Yeah, I can prove it. But it'll take time to build a legal case. We don't have time, Dallas said. CPS will be here in 2 days. If they decide Roe's environment is unsafe, they can remove her immediately. Even if I fight it in court, she goes into foster care while it's being litigated. Silence fell. Then Rusty spoke. We need leverage. Something big enough that Pierce backs off immediately. Something he's more afraid of than losing an election. Like what? Someone asked. Fletcher smiled slowly. I might have something, but it's risky. And if we're wrong, we could all end up in jail. Tell us, Dallas said. Fletcher pulled out his tablet, showed them what he'd found. As they read, faces changed. Eyes widened. Jesus Christ, Boone whispered. Can we use this? Rusty asked. If we do it right, Cormac said slowly, but it has to be perfect. One mistake and Pierce's lawyers will bury us. Dallas looked around the room, at these men who'd become his brothers, at Margaret who'd become his family. Then we do it perfect, he said. Tomorrow, we end this tomorrow. Margaret couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Roe, about a little girl being taken from her father because Margaret had brought trouble into their lives, about how history was repeating itself, how once again she was the reason a child lost their home. She was reaching for her bag, preparing to run to remove herself from the equation, when there was a knock on her door. Maggie, you awake? Rusty's voice. She opened the door. He stood there, leather jacket zipped against the cold, holding 2 cups of coffee. Figured you weren't sleeping, he said. Mind if I come in? They sat on the small cot drinking coffee that was too strong and too hot. I was going to run, Margaret admitted. I know, it's what you do, what you've always done. If I leave, maybe Pierce will back off. Maybe Roe will be safe. Rusty was quiet for a moment. Then Declan used to say something. Want to know what it was? Margaret nodded. He said running never solves anything. It just makes you tired and alone. Rusty looked at her. You've been running for 41 years, Maggie. You're tired. You're alone. And it hasn't solved a damn thing. I don't know how to stop. You already did, the moment you stood up for Roe. The moment you stayed when Dallas offered you a home. The moment you said yes to being here. He finished his coffee. Tomorrow we're going to fight, and we need you there. Not running, not hiding. There, being brave one more time. I'm not brave. Yeah, you are. You just forgot for a while. He stood. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. After he left, Margaret sat in the dark. Thought about running, thought about staying, thought about a little girl named Roe who'd held her hand in the hospital and called her brave, thought about Dallas who'd given her a home without asking for anything in return, thought about Declan who died doing the right thing, even when it cost him everything. She put her bag away. Tomorrow she would stay. Tomorrow she would fight. Tomorrow she would be brave. Dawn came gray and cold over Portland. Margaret stood at the garage window watching the city wake up her reflection, ghost-like in the glass. 72 years old, 41 of them spent invisible. And today she would become more visible than she'd ever wanted to be. Behind her, the garage was already filling with people. Not just bikers this time. Rose sat at the front desk, dressed carefully in clothes Dallas had pressed himself. Fletcher was on his laptop, fingers flying. Cormac reviewed documents with the intensity of a man preparing for a trial. And Dallas stood near the door, arms crossed, watching the street like he expected an army. Maybe he did. Maggie, Rusty appeared at her elbow. Time to get ready. I don't know if I can do this. You can, you will. He handed her something. A leather vest, women's cut, old school, and on the back, carefully stitched a memorial patch. Declan Callahan's name, his dates, the Portland chapter rocker. This was made for you 42 years ago, Rusty said quietly, after Declan died. We were going to give it to you at his funeral, but you disappeared before we could. Margaret's hands shook as she touched the leather. I can't wear this. I don't deserve. Declan would want you to have it, would want you to remember who you are. Whose you are. Rusty's voice was firm. You're not just Margaret, the homeless woman. You're Maggie Callahan, Declan's old lady, one of us. And today you're going to show Pierce Voss what that means. Margaret put on the vest. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting 42 years for this exact moment. The leather settled around her shoulders like armor, like belonging, like home. Cormac stood at the center of the garage, everyone gathered around him. Here's how this works, he began. At 9 a.m., Pierce is holding a press conference at City Hall. He's going to announce that he's personally overseeing the investigation into gang activity and child endangerment in his district. Translation, he's going to publicly attack Dallas, attack Maggie, and paint himself as the hero protecting children from dangerous criminals. Bastard, someone muttered. Agreed. But here's what he doesn't know. Fletcher found records that Pierce has been using his counsel position to identify properties in the path of planned development projects. He then tips off his brother-in-law's company, which makes lowball offers to property owners. If they refuse, Pierce uses code enforcement and zoning violations to make their lives hell until they sell. Dallas's jaw tightened. That's what he's doing to me. Exactly, but it gets better, or worse depending on your perspective. Cormac pulled up a document on his tablet. 3 years ago, a woman named Rita Sandoval owned a small restaurant in the Pearl District. Beautiful place. Family-owned for 30 years. Pierce's brother-in-law wanted the property for a condo development. Rita refused to sell. Suddenly, she's getting health code violations, zoning complaints, building inspections every week. She fought for 6 months. Then her restaurant burned down. The room went silent. Arson, Boone asked. Fire marshal ruled it accidental, faulty wiring, but Rita didn't believe it. She tried to fight, but without insurance money and facing mounting legal fees from all the violations, she sold the land for 20 cents on the dollar. To guess who? Brennan Brothers Development, Dallas said. The fire was never properly investigated because the lead inspector was promoted to a city position 2 months later, a position created by a city council vote. Pierce voted yes. Fletcher stood up. I tracked down Rita Sandoval. She's living in Seattle now, working 3 jobs to make ends meet. And she's willing to talk, on camera, today. But we need more than one person's story, Cormac continued. We need to show a pattern. So Fletcher and I spent the last 3 days finding every property owner who was forced to sell in the path of development projects approved during Pierce's tenure. We found 11, and 7 of them are willing to testify about the pressure tactics, the sudden violations, the city officials who made their lives impossible. Rusty smiled slowly. You're building a RICO case. Not quite RICO, but close enough. Pattern of corruption, abuse of office, potential criminal conspiracy. Even if the DA doesn't prosecute immediately, the evidence is damning enough that Pierce will be forced to resign or face impeachment. When do we release this? Dallas asked. That's where it gets interesting, Fletcher said. We don't release it, Maggie does. Every eye in the room turned to Margaret. She felt her heart start to race. What? Pierce is holding a press conference at 9, Fletcher explained. By 8:30, there'll be reporters setting up outside City Hall. We're going to call them. Tell them that Margaret Callahan, the homeless woman at the center of the controversy, wants to make a statement, that she has evidence about Councilman Voss. They'll come, Rusty added. This is a big story. Homeless woman versus powerful politician. They won't be able to resist. And when they're all there, when the cameras are rolling, you're going to tell them everything, Cormac said. Who you are, what happened to you, why you're homeless, what Pierce has done to you in Dallas, and then you're going to present the evidence about the other victims. Margaret's mouth went dry. I can't speak in front of cameras. I can't. Yes, you can, Dallas said. He came to stand beside her. You stood up to 5 teenagers to protect Roe. You faced down Garrett when he came here threatening you. You've survived 41 years on the street. You can do this. But what if I mess up? What if I say the wrong thing? Then you say the wrong thing, Rusty said gently. Maggie, this isn't about being perfect. It's about being real, being honest, showing people who you really are and why this matters. Nobody can do that but you. Margaret looked around the room, at these men who'd become her family, at Roe watching her with those serious green eyes, at Dallas steady and strong and believing in her, at the memorial patch on her vest, Declan's name, a reminder of who she'd been, who she could be again. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. 8:30 a.m., City Hall steps. The media was already setting up when Margaret arrived. 3 news vans, print reporters, bloggers with cameras. A bigger crowd than she'd expected. They looked at her, this old woman in a memorial vest flanked by 50 bikers, with curiosity, with skepticism, with the particular kind of judgment reserved for homeless people who dare to speak. Fletcher had called ahead, told them Margaret Callahan had a statement about Councilman Voss, told them she had evidence. Now she stood on the steps, microphones thrust toward her face, cameras pointed at her like weapons. Behind her, the bikers formed a wall, silent, supportive. There, Margaret's hands shook. She gripped the folder Fletcher had given her. Evidence, proof, the stories of 11 people whose lives Pierce Voss had destroyed. A reporter called out, "Miss Callahan, is it true you're homeless?" "Yes. And you're living in an illegal situation at Mr. Thorne's garage." "I'm living in a room Mr. Thorne gave me in exchange for security work. There's nothing illegal about it. Councilman Voss says you're part of a gang intimidation campaign. What do you say to that?" Margaret looked at the cameras, at the reporters, at the people gathering on the sidewalk to watch, and she began to speak. "My name is Margaret Ann Callahan. I'm 72 years old. For the last 41 years, I've been homeless." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "I wasn't always homeless. I was married once, to a man named Declan Callahan. He was a member of the Hells Angels Portland chapter, a founding member, one of the original 12. She paused. "Let that sink in. Declan died in 1982. August 14th, he was riding on Interstate 84 when he saw a child 5 years old who'd wandered onto the highway. The child's parents had stopped for a tire blowout. The child had gotten out of the car and was walking into traffic. Her voice steadied as she told Declan's story. Declan could have swerved, could have saved himself, but he didn't. He put his motorcycle between that child and an oncoming semi-truck. He saved the child's life, and he gave his own. Some of the reporters were writing furiously. Others just listened. After Declan died, I fell apart. I had a daughter, Ainsley. She was 12, and I couldn't take care of her. I started drinking. Stopped being able to function. Social services took her in 1985. They were right to take her. I wasn't fit to be a mother. I was broken." Margaret's voice cracked slightly. "I've been on the street ever since. 41 years, moving from city to city, sleeping in doorways, under bridges, in parks. I became invisible. I became nothing. Until 2 weeks ago." She told them about Roe, about the 5 teenagers, about choosing to stand up even though she was terrified. "I was attacked, knocked down, my head split open on the sidewalk, but I would do it again because that child needed someone, and for the first time in 41 years, I was someone who could help." The crowd was silent now, listening. "Dallas Thorne Roe's father took me to the hospital, paid for my care, gave me a home, gave me a job, gave me back my dignity. He didn't do this for publicity. He didn't do it for politics. He did it because it was right." Margaret held up the folder. "And now Councilman Pierce Voss is trying to destroy him for it, trying to take his business, trying to take his daughter. Why? Because Dallas's garage sits on land that Pierce's brother-in-law wants for a development project." She opened the folder, began reading names. Rita Sandoval, restaurant owner, forced to sell after mysterious fire and months of harassment. Eduardo Martinez, auto body shop, forced to sell after zoning violations appeared overnight. Jennifer Wu, bookstore owner, forced to sell after building inspector found violations nobody had mentioned in 20 years of previous inspections. On and on, 11 names, 11 stories. These people lost their businesses, their livelihoods, their dreams, all because they owned property that Pierce Voss's family wanted, and Pierce used his position as councilman to make their lives hell until they gave up. She held up documents, transfer records, inspection reports, email chains. "I have evidence, proof, documentation, and I'm giving it to you, to the press, to the public, to anyone who will listen." A reporter shouted a question. "Why should we believe you? You're homeless. You have an agenda." Margaret looked at him, really looked at him. "You're right. I'm homeless. I have nothing, no money, no power, no reason for you to believe me. Except this, I have nothing to gain from lying. I'm 72 years old. I've been invisible for 41 years. I could have stayed invisible, could have walked away, but I didn't, because sometimes the people with nothing are the only ones brave enough to tell the truth." She stepped back. Rusty stepped forward. "We have copies of all documents for any media outlet that wants them. We also have 7 of the 11 victims ready to speak on camera. They're waiting at Dallas Thorne's garage right now. Anyone who wants to hear their stories is welcome to come. The reporters erupted with questions, but Margaret was done. She'd said what needed to be said. Now the truth would do the rest. Pierce Voss's press conference was a disaster. He'd barely started speaking when reporters began shouting questions about Margaret's allegations, about the property owners, about his brother-in-law's development company. Pierce tried to deflect, called it a smear campaign, blamed the bikers, blamed Margaret, but the reporters had the documents now, had the names, had the proof, and they were hungry. Pierce ended the press conference after 7 minutes walking away while reporters shouted questions at his back. By 10 a.m., the story was everywhere. Local news, national news, social media exploding with #StandWithMaggie and #VossCorruption. By 11 a.m., the mayor had called for an independent investigation. By noon, the state attorney general had announced a formal inquiry. By 1 p.m., Pierce Voss's lawyer had released a statement saying his client would be taking a leave of absence from city council to focus on his family and to cooperate fully with all investigations. By 2 p.m., the Child Protective Services complaint against Dallas had been quietly withdrawn, insufficient evidence to proceed. The war was over, and they had won. Margaret sat in the back room exhausted, overwhelmed, still shaking from the adrenaline of the morning. There was a knock on her door. "Maggie," Dallas's voice, "there's someone here to see you." "I can't talk to more reporters. I can't—" "Not a reporter." Something in his voice made Margaret stand, made her open the door. Dallas stood there, and beside him, a woman. 53 maybe? Brown hair streaked with gray, green eyes, freckles across her nose, familiar eyes, familiar freckles. "Mom." The word hit Margaret like a physical blow. Ainsley. They stood there, mother and daughter, separated by 41 years and 3 feet of space that felt like an ocean. "I saw you," Ainsley said. Her voice was shaking. "On the news. I saw you, and I couldn't believe." She stopped, started again. "Fletcher found me yesterday, told me you were here, that you were alive. I didn't know if I should come. I was so angry for so long, and I didn't know if I could face you, but then I saw you this morning, and—" Ainsley was crying now. "I saw you being brave, saw you standing up for people, and I thought that's my mom. That's who she really is." Margaret couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I wasn't strong enough. Sorry I let them take you. Sorry I wasted 41 years when I could have been your mother." "I was so angry," Ainsley said. "For years. I hated you for leaving me, for choosing alcohol over me, for giving up. You should hate me. I did, for a long time." Ainsley took a step closer. "But I'm a nurse. I work in addiction recovery, and I've seen what grief does to people, how it breaks them. And I think maybe you were broken. Not bad, just broken." "I was broken," Margaret agreed. "I still am. But you're here. You're fighting. You stood up this morning and told the truth even though you were terrified." Ainsley's voice cracked. "That took courage, real courage." "I learned from someone brave," Margaret said softly. "From a little girl who held my hand in the hospital and told me thank you for being brave. She reminded me what courage looks like." They stood there, not quite touching, separated by decades of pain. Then Ainsley closed the distance, wrapped her arms around her mother for the first time in 41 years. And Margaret held her daughter and wept. They sat in the garage office talking, learning each other again. Ainsley told Margaret about her life, about her adoptive family, kind people who'd given her stability and love, about nursing school, about her 2 kids grown now living their own lives, about her divorce 5 years ago. "I looked for you," Ainsley said, "when I turned 18. I wanted to find you, to ask why, but you disappeared completely. No trail, no records, like you'd never existed. I didn't want to be found. I was ashamed. I understand now. I didn't then, but I do now." Margaret showed her the handkerchief, the embroidered forget-me-nots, the initials MC 1974. "I made this the year I married your father," Margaret said. "Kept it all these years. It was the only thing I had left from before." Ainsley touched the fabric gently. "Tell me about him. About Declan. I barely remember." So Margaret told her about Declan's laugh, his strength, his absolute certainty about right and wrong, about how he'd loved motorcycles and music and his family with equal intensity, about the day he died saving a child. "He was brave," Margaret finished, "braver than I ever was." "You were brave today," Ainsley said. "He would have been proud." They talked until dark. making up for lost time, building a bridge across 4 decades. And when Ainsley finally had to leave, had to get back to Seattle, to her job, to her life, she hugged Margaret again. "I'm not ready to call you Mom yet," she said honestly. "It's been too long, too much hurt. I know, but maybe we can start with Margaret, with getting to know each other, with being, I don't know, something." "I'd like that," Margaret said. "I'd like that very much. I'll come back next weekend. We can talk more. And maybe you can meet your grandkids sometime, if you want." Margaret's heart cracked open. "I'd love that." After Ainsley left, Margaret stood in the garage crying again. But these were different tears. Not grief, not shame, hope. 3 months later, June 2026. The cemetery was green and quiet under summer sun. Rose City Memorial, where Portland buried its dead with dignity and remembrance. Margaret stood before a headstone. Simple granite, clean lines. Declan, James Callahan, 1958 to 1982. Beloved husband, father, brother, he gave his life for another. She wasn't alone. 60 bikers stood in formation behind her. Young and old, active members and retired, all wearing colors, all here to honor one of their own. Ainsley stood beside Margaret, holding her hand, and next to Ainsley, her 2 children, Margaret's grandchildren, meeting their grandmother for the first time. Dallas and Roe were there. Rusty, Boone, Fletcher, Cormac, all the men who'd fought for her, protected her, given her back her life. Rusty stepped forward, stood at attention. "Declan Callahan," he said, his voice carrying across the cemetery. "Brother, hero, friend. August 14th, 1982, you made the choice that defined you. You saw danger, saw a child who needed help, and you didn't hesitate. You didn't calculate the cost, you just acted. Because that's who you were." He paused. "Today we honor you, and we honor your wife Margaret, who learned your lesson, who stood up when someone needed help, who found her courage after 41 years, who came home." The bikers began calling out, one by one, "Declan Callahan, brother, forever." The words echoed, ritual, remembrance, respect. Then Rusty held out something, a patch, small, silver-edged, official. "Margaret Callahan," he said formally, "the Portland chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club recognizes you as family, as one of our own. This is an honorary patch. It means you're protected. It means you're respected. It means you belong." He pinned it to her vest, the leather she wore with pride now. Margaret touched the patch, felt the weight of it, the meaning. "Thank you," she whispered. Behind her, 60 bikers revved their engines in unison. A salute, a goodbye, a promise. Declan Callahan was gone, but his legacy lived on, in his daughter, in his widow, in the brotherhood he'd built, in the courage he'd shown. The garage had a new sign. Iron Horse and Callahan Family Motorcycles established. 2014 rebuilt 2026. Margaret stood at the front desk organizing invoices. She wore reading glasses now, proper clothes, hair cut and clean, face that had filled out from regular meals. She looked like someone, because she was someone. The door chimed. Garrett Voss walked in. Margaret tensed. Old instincts, old fears. But Garrett looked different, smaller somehow, humbled. "Miss Callahan," he said quietly, "is Mr. Thorne here?" "In the back, working on a restoration." Garrett nodded. Started to leave. Stopped. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what I did. For hurting you. For being," he struggled for words, "for being the person I was." Margaret studied him. This boy who'd terrorized her, who'd pushed her down, who'd been part of why all this started. "Your father," she asked, "in jail, awaiting trial. My mom divorced him. We moved to a smaller house. I'm working 2 jobs to help her with bills." Garrett's voice was matter of fact. "I deserved all of it." "Yes," Margaret agreed. "You did. Mr. Thorne lets me work here on weekends, teaches me about motorcycles, about doing things right, about being better." Margaret saw it then, the change, the genuine remorse. "Good," she said. "Keep being better." Garrett nodded and went to find Dallas. Roe came in from school, 9 years old now, taller, confident. Bay Maggie, she used the Vietnamese term for grandmother that one of her school friends had taught her. "Look what I made." She held up embroidery, a flower, not perfect but careful, made with love. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. Can we add it to the memorial?" In the corner of that garage, they'd created a small shrine, photos of Declan, of Sienna, of the people they'd lost and remembered. And next to the photos, a growing collection of embroidered flowers, Margaret and Rose's ongoing project. Of course we can. They hung the flower together. The door opened again. Ainsley came in carrying coffee and pastries. Thought you might want lunch, she said, then tentatively, Mom. The word still felt new, still felt strange, but also right. Thank you, sweetheart. They sat together. 3 generations, talking, laughing, being family. Later, when the garage closed and everyone had gone home, Margaret stood in her room. Her home, real and solid and permanent. She looked at the photos on her shelf. Declan, young and strong. Ainsley as a child. Her grandchildren. Ro, Dallas. The family she'd lost. The family she'd found. The family she'd built. And she thought about the journey. 41 years in the wilderness. 41 years of being no one. Being nothing. Being invisible. And then 2 weeks that changed everything. 2 weeks that taught her courage. That gave her back her name. That reminded her she mattered. She touched Declan's photo. I did it, she whispered. I found my way home. Finally. Outside, the city lights glittered. Portland, her city, the place where she'd lost everything and found it again. Tomorrow she would wake up in her own bed, would have coffee with people who knew her name, would work at a job that gave her purpose, would hug her daughter and grandchildren, would be someone. But tonight she stood in the quiet and felt something she hadn't felt in 41 years. Peace. She was Margaret Ann Callahan, Declan's widow, Ainsley's mother, Rose Ba Maggie, Dallas's friend, the Portland chapter's family. She was homeless no longer. She was home, and home was exactly where she belonged. The annual Portland Veterans Day ceremony took place at the memorial downtown. Flags flying, crowds gathered, politicians speaking about sacrifice and service. But Margaret wasn't there. She was at Rose City Cemetery with Rusty and Dallas and 30 bikers. They gathered around Declan's grave every year on this day. Not Veterans Day, not Memorial Day. August 14th, the day he died. The day he chose courage over safety. This year, Margaret brought something new, a quilt. She'd spent months making it. Embroidered panels telling Declan's story. His life, his death, his legacy. And in the center, new panels, telling her story. Telling about courage found after decades of fear. About coming home after 41 years of being lost. She draped it over the headstone. This is us, she said to Declan's memory. What we were, what I became, what I am now. Rusty put his hand on her shoulder. Dallas stood on her other side. Ainsley held her hand, and 63 bikers, 3 generations of Portland chapter, stood in silent tribute to a man who died doing the right thing, and to a woman who'd learned to live the same way. The engines revved. Thunder and memory, promise and pride, then silence. Margaret looked at the quilt, at the story stitched in fabric and thread, a story of loss and redemption, of fear and courage, of being broken and becoming whole. Her story, Declan's story, their story, and it wasn't finished yet. There were more chapters to write, more days to live, more love to give, more courage to find. She smiled through her tears. Thank you, she whispered, to Declan, to Dallas, to Rusty, to all the people who'd saved her when she couldn't save herself. Thank you for reminding me who I am. The wind carried her words across the cemetery, carried them home. For those who feel lost, it's never too late to come home. For those who feel invisible, you are seen. For those who feel worthless, you matter, always. In memory of all the Declans who chose courage over safety, and for all the Margarets who found their way home.